The perfect morning has a certain sound. It's not silence. Silence is overrated and usually means an appliance is about to die. No, the perfect morning sounds like the low, happy hum of the coffee maker, the distant whir of a lawnmower 2 blocks over, close enough for ambiance, far enough to not be annoying, and the gentle rustle of 1,000 leaves whispering in the breeze. That was my morning. I was sitting on my front porch, cradling a mug that said, "I'm silently correcting your grammar," watching the world wake up in that hazy, golden hour way that makes even the most boring suburban street look like a movie set. My house is my sanctuary. It's not huge, it's not flashy, but it's mine. A tidy little 2-story box of contentment I'd managed to snag before the market went completely insane. I work from home as a graphic designer, which means I spend an obscene amount of time within these 4 walls. My commute is a grueling 12-step journey from my bed to my desk. So, the view from my window and my porch is everything. And the best part of that view, the absolute crown jewel of my little kingdom, was the glorious, untamed rebellion of my rose bushes. They weren't just bushes. They were a living barricade, a thorny fortress of solitude lining the edge of my property. My late grandmother, Nana Rose, a name so perfect it had to be fate, had planted them decades ago. She was a woman who believed nature shouldn't be tamed, just occasionally pointed in the right direction. The bushes were a testament to her philosophy. They were a chaotic riot of deep greens, crimson reds, and blushing pinks, growing with a kind of wild abandon that I deeply respected. They smelled like heaven on a warm day and acted as a formidable deterrent to door-to-door salesmen and over-enthusiastic neighborhood kids chasing rogue frisbees. They were perfect. I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, feeling a wave of profound, uncomplicated peace wash over me. This was it. This was the dream. Owning a home, drinking coffee on your own porch, lord and master of your own. The squeak of the mail slot cut through my reverie. I ambled inside, picked up the small pile of junk mail, and saw it. One crisp, cream-colored envelope, looking far too important to be announcing a sale on vinyl siding. The return address read, Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. My stomach did a little flip. The HOA. The shadowy council of suburban busybodies who governed everything from acceptable mailbox colors to the maximum allowable height of one's grass. I'd managed to avoid their gaze for 2 years, living a quiet life of blissful non-compliance. It seemed my luck had run out. I tore it open. The paper was thick, expensive. It felt judgmental in my hands. The text was printed in a serene, calming font that was completely at odds with the rage-inducing message it conveyed. Dear resident of 124 Blossom Lane, this letter serves as a friendly, official notice regarding a minor compliance issue observed during a routine neighborhood assessment on September 15th, 2025. We have noted that the flora situated at the front of your property is in violation of the Pleasant Meadows Community Guidelines. Specifically, this pertains to Bylaw 7, Section 4C, Overgrown Flora. The bylaw states that all shrubbery must be maintained in a neat and orderly fashion and pruned to a uniform height, not to exceed 36 inches. We kindly request that you rectify this issue within 14 days. We appreciate your cooperation in keeping Pleasant Meadows a beautiful and harmonious place to live. Sincerely, the Pleasant Meadows HOA Board. I read it twice, then a third time, just to make sure I wasn't having a stroke. Overgrown flora. They made my grandmother's beautiful rose bushes sound like a case of alien fungus. Uniform height? Did they want me to get out there with a ruler and a level? Give them little thorny flat tops like a 1990s boy band? The sheer, unmitigated gall. I immediately called Sarah. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" she asked, her voice cheerful. "They've come for me, Sarah," I said, my tone deadly serious. "Who's they? Is this about you using my Netflix password again?" "Worse, the HOA. They've sent a letter, an edict, a declaration of war." I read the letter to her, complete with dramatic inflections. When I was done, there was a pause. "Oh, is that all?" she said, the relief in her voice palpable. "Mark, I thought someone died." "Someone's spirit is dying, Sarah. The free spirit of these rose bushes. They want me to cut them down to 3 feet. 3 feet! That's barely knee-high. It's horticultural castration." "Don't be so dramatic. Just trim them a little. It's not worth the fight." "It's the principle of the thing," I protested, pacing my living room. "These aren't just bushes. They're Nana's legacy of horticultural chaos. She'd want me to fight for their right to be gloriously inconvenient. This is an affront to her memory." "Your Nana also thought Cool Whip was a food group and told me I should wear more beige. Maybe don't use her as your moral compass on this one. Look, just take an inch or two off the top. They won't know the difference." "Oh, they'll know," I muttered, staring out the window at the offending letter. I have a feeling these people know everything. Sarah sighed, the sound of a woman who had fought and lost this kind of battle with me before. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" Famous last words. I looked from the letter to the bushes and back again. A feeling of righteous indignation swelled in my chest. This was my hill. My thorny, overgrown, beautifully chaotic hill, and I was prepared to die on it. I walked to the kitchen. A man with a purpose. I took the HOA's thick, creamy, judgmental letter, folded it precisely in half, and filed it neatly away in its proper place. The bottom of the recycling bin, right under an empty yogurt container. The battle had begun. For a week there was peace. A tense, fragile peace, but peace nonetheless. Every time I heard a car slow down on my street, I expected to see a beige sedan full of HOA enforcers, but nothing happened. The letter sat in the landfill, decomposing into the oblivion it deserved. I'd won, I thought. My silent protest, my act of passive resistance had been successful. They had fired their shot, and I had ignored it. Checkmate? I was, of course, an idiot. The following Tuesday, I was deep in the zone, wrestling with a particularly obnoxious logo design for a company that sold artisanal dog water. The client wanted the font to look like a splash, but also professional. I was trying to explain for the third time that those two things are mutually exclusive when a shadow fell across my desk. It was a long, thin shadow, sharp and severe. I looked up and out my office window, and my blood ran cold. There, on my immaculate, if slightly too long lawn, stood a woman. She was a prim, sharp-angled person who looked as if she'd been assembled from a kit of disapproving glares and sensible shoes. She wore a beige pantsuit that seemed to absorb the light and joy from the world around her. In one hand she held a clipboard. In the other, a small silver tape measure. Flanking her was a tall, stoic man with a mustache that looked like it was afraid of his upper lip. He just stood there, a silent pillar of judgment. This had to be them, the HOA in the flesh. I excused myself from my client call, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. "Okay, Mark, be cool, be reasonable. You're an adult. You can handle this." I opened the front door and stepped onto the porch, arranging my face into what I hoped was a friendly, non-threatening expression. The woman turned to me, and her eyes, small and dark, scanned me from head to toe. I felt like I was being audited. "Mr. Jensen?" she asked. Her voice was crisp and devoid of warmth, like celery. "That's me," I said, trying to sound breezy. "Can I help you?" I am Brenda Barlow, president of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association. This is Gerald, our vice president. Gerald gave a curt nod, his mustache remaining immobile. Brenda, Gerald, a pleasure. Big fans of your work. The coordinated trash can colors? A stroke of genius. Brenda did not smile. I don't think the muscles in her face were capable of it. We sent a notice last week regarding your shrubbery. Ah, yes, the flora memo. I think I remember seeing that. And yet, she said, gesturing to the rose bushes with her clipboard, no action has been taken. The thicket remains. The thicket? It was official. I hated this woman. I've been busy, I lied. Big project at work. You know how it is. Brenda's eyes narrowed. Mr. Jensen, the guidelines are not suggestions. They are the rules that maintain the aesthetic integrity and property values of our community. She then did something so stunningly bizarre, I could only stare. She strode over to my largest rose bush, unspooled her tape measure with a flick of her wrist, and measured a particularly defiant branch. The tape measure snapped back with a sharp thwack. 58 inches, she announced, as if she'd just discovered a dead body. That is a full 22 inches of non-compliance. 22! She said the number like it was a personal insult. I couldn't help it. A laugh escaped my lips. A short, sharp bark of disbelief. Wow, 22 inches. I'm practically a supervillain. Should I turn myself in, or will you be sending the shrubbery SWAT team? If looks could kill, Brenda's would have been a tactical nuclear strike. Sarcasm won't satisfy Bylaw 7, Section 4C, she said, her voice dropping a register. This is your official second warning. It will be documented. She made a crisp checkmark on her clipboard. The next communication you receive will be a fine of $100, and that fine will be reassessed weekly until the violation is rectified. I felt a flash of real anger. This was insane. Look, Brenda, I said, my friendly demeanor evaporating. These bushes were planted by my grandmother. They have sentimental value. They're part of the reason I bought this house. Can't you just let it go? Sentimental value is not a recognized exemption in the community guidelines, she stated flatly. She then gestured across the street to my neighbor's yard, a sterile green expanse populated by 3 perfectly spherical, utterly soulless boxwood shrubs. That is compliance, Mr. Jensen. Neat, orderly, predictable. That is the Pleasant Meadows way. She turned to leave, Gerald falling into step behind her like a well-trained guard dog. I'm sure we'll see a significant improvement soon, she said over her shoulder, a clear threat hanging in the air. They marched back across the street to her identical, yet somehow more menacing, house. I stood on my porch, watching them go. The morning no longer felt perfect. The air felt heavy, tainted by the beige scent of bureaucratic tyranny. This was no longer about bushes. This was about a fundamental clash of philosophies. My philosophy, that a little bit of chaos is beautiful, versus hers, that anything over 36 inches is a crime against humanity. The line had been drawn, on my lawn, at exactly 37 inches, and Brenda Barlow had just crossed it. Another week passed. I spent most of it stewing. Every time I looked at my glorious 58-inch-high rose bushes, I felt a mix of pride and dread. I'd started to see Brenda's beige sedan creeping past my house at odd hours, her silhouette visible in the driver's seat. It was a full-blown, low-speed surveillance operation. Then, on Friday, the second letter arrived. It was just as creamy and self-important as the first, but this one came with an invoice. Violation fine, $100. Reason: continued non-compliance with Bylaw 7, Section 4C. Due date: 14 days. Note: this fine will be reapplied every 7 days until the issue is resolved. $100. They were fining me $100 for the crime of having plants that were too happy. I slapped the letter down on the kitchen counter, the fury simmering inside me reaching a rolling boil. "That's it!" I yelled to an empty house. "That's it!" I called Sarah, my phone already hot in my hand. "She did it, Sarah! The Wicked Witch of Pleasant Meadows actually did it! She fined me!" "Okay, deep breaths," Sarah said, her voice calm and steady. "How much?" $100, and another 100 every week. At this rate, these roses will be the most expensive foliage in the history of botany. I could buy a whole rainforest for what this is going to cost me." "Mark, just pay the fine and trim the stupid things," she said, her voice laced with an exasperation I knew all too well. "Please. For me? I don't want to be dating a suburban outlaw. It's not a good look." "But it's extortion. It's tyranny with a 3-hole punch. I can't just cave." "Yes, you can. It's called being a grown-up. Sometimes grown-ups have to trim their bushes even when they don't want to." We went back and forth for another 10 minutes. She was making sense, which was infuriating. My righteous anger was beginning to curdle into a sad, deflated sense of defeat. She was right. What was I going to do? Let the fines pile up until they put a lien on my house? Go to war with my neighbors over a couple of feet of shrubbery? I hung up, feeling dejected. I slumped onto my office chair and stared out the window. My beautiful roses seemed to droop in solidarity. Brenda had won. With a heavy heart, I typed "landscaping services near me" into Google. The screen filled with generic companies promising curb appeal and manicured perfection. I saw pictures of sterile mulch beds and perfectly identical hedges. It was a gallery of everything I hated. It was Brenda's world. I scrolled aimlessly, my finger moving with the lethargic pace of a condemned man. And then I saw it. Tucked between an ad for Pete's Pruning and Lawn and Order was a small, text-based ad that was completely different. "Arturo Verde, sculptor of the living form. I don't prune, I reveal." The name alone was intriguing. I clicked the link. The website was a masterpiece of glorious, over-the-top chaos. There were no pictures of neat hedges. Instead, it was a portfolio of the most incredible topiary I had ever seen. A flock of ivy geese taking flight from the side of a garage. A pair of boxwood squirrels riding a unicorn. A giant, leafy hand emerging from the earth to offer up a flower. It was bizarre, brilliant, and utterly defiant. This wasn't landscaping. This was art. I scrolled through the gallery, mesmerized. Then I saw it. A project titled "The Suburban Dragon." Some brave soul had commissioned Arturo to shape a massive hedge into a sleeping dragon, its tail wrapping around the corner of the house. It was magnificent. An idea began to form in my mind. A tiny, wicked, beautiful spark. It started in the back of my brain and quickly spread like wildfire. The HOA letter said I had to prune the bushes. It said they had to be under a certain height. It used words like neat and orderly, but it never said what shape they had to be. The letter of the law, not the spirit. Malicious compliance. A slow, wide grin spread across my face. I looked from the picture of the boxwood dragon to my own overgrown, thorny, beloved rose bushes outside. They weren't a problem anymore. They were a canvas. I picked up the phone, my heart thumping with a giddy, terrifying sense of purpose. Brenda Barlow wanted me to prune my bushes. Fine, I'd prune them. I'd prune them into something the likes of which Pleasant Meadows had never seen before. 2 days later, a vehicle pulled up to my curb that could only be described as a rolling Jackson Pollock painting. It was a vintage 1980s van, once white, now a chaotic canvas of overlapping paint splatters, murals of vines, and the occasional handprint. The words "Verdi's Vans of Van Gogh" were painted on the side in a swirling psychedelic script. From this magnificent beast emerged a man who was every bit as dramatic as his ride. He had a wild mane of silver hair that defied gravity, a flowing, brightly colored scarf wrapped around his neck despite the warm weather, and a pair of small, round glasses perched on the end of his nose. He strode onto my lawn with the confidence of a rock star taking the stage, his eyes scanning my property with an intense, artistic focus. This had to be Arturo Verde. "You are the man of the roses, yes?" he asked. His accent was a fascinating cocktail, a little bit Italian, a little bit Spanish, with a dash of something I couldn't quite place. It was an accent that had seen the world and found it all very inspiring. "Mark Jensen," I said, shaking his hand. His grip was firm, his hand surprisingly calloused. "And you must be Arturo." "The Arturo," he corrected gently, a twinkle in his eye. "There is only one." He turned his attention to my rose bushes, his expression shifting from amusement to profound seriousness. He walked their length, lightly touching a petal here, examining a thorny branch there. He even sniffed a deep red bloom, closing his eyes as if communing with its very soul. "Magnificent," he breathed. "Such passion, such fire. They refuse to be tamed. They have duende." "They also have a $100 a week fine attached to them," I said dryly. "The HOA says I have to prune them. They want them uniform, under 36 inches. Arturo scoffed, a theatrical sound of pure disdain. "Uniformity? Bah! Uniformity is the death of the soul. It is the beige paint of existence. But rules—" He paused, turning to me with a conspiratorial glint in his eyes. "Rules can be a wonderful cage from which the bird of creativity must escape." I grinned. This was my guy. "That's sort of what I was hoping you'd say. I saw your website, The Dragon. It was inspired." "Ah, yes, the Pemberton Dragon. A glorious battle that was. Mrs. Pemberton wanted to hide the fact that her husband had painted their garage a truly offensive shade of puce. We gave them something better to look at. A triumph!" He clasped his hands together. "So tell me, Mr. Jensen, what form of beautiful rebellion do you have trapped in your heart?" This was it. The moment of truth. I took a deep breath. I was thinking, could you maybe shape them into something? Something prehistoric? Arturo's eyes, magnified by his little glasses, went wide. He was silent for a full 10 seconds, and for a terrifying moment I thought I'd gone too far. Maybe he just did dragons and squirrels. Then he threw his head back and let out a booming laugh that startled a flock of sparrows from a nearby tree. "Dinosaurs!" he roared, slapping his knee. "Si, magnifico! The ultimate rebellion against extinction. A message to these committee people. You tell us to cut back, we will come back stronger, older, with bigger teeth." He was more excited about it than I was. His artistic energy was infectious. "So you can do it?" "Can I do it?" He gestured to the bushes as if they were a block of uncarved marble. "My friend, I will not simply prune. I will reveal the soul of the beast within the branch. We shall make them a monument to glorious non-compliance. A Tyrannosaurus Rex, yes? His mighty roar silenced by the thorny beauty of the rose. He will face the house of the enemy." "The enemy's name is Brenda Barlow. She lives right across the street," I said, pointing. "Perfect," Arturo declared. "He will stare into her window. And for the other side, a Stegosaurus, his plates like petals of armor. And here," he pointed to the tall, lanky bush near the oak tree, "a Brachiosaurus, his neck a graceful curve of defiance. It is a symphony of spite, a pettiness made art. I love it. We spent the next hour like two generals planning a campaign. We sketched designs on the back of my HOA fine notice, a delicious irony that was not lost on either of us. Arturo spoke of things like negative space, and structural integrity. While I mostly pointed and said things like, "Can you make the T-Rex look really angry?" we decided on the placement for maximum visual impact, ensuring that Brenda's living room window would have a direct, unobstructed view of a crimson rose Tyrannosaurus in mid-roar. Finally, we came to the delicate subject of price. Arturo scribbled a number on the paper. It was significant. It was several times the cost of the accumulated fines. I looked at the number, then at the sheer, unadulterated joy on Arturo's face, then across the street at Brenda's perfectly manicured, soul-crushingly boring lawn. Sarah's voice of reason echoed faintly in my head, telling me to be an adult, to just trim the stupid things. I ignored it. "When can you start?" I asked. Arturo Verde beamed, his smile as bright and chaotic as his van. "The revolution," he announced, "begins at dawn." The revolution began not with a bang, but with the clatter of unusual gardening equipment. At precisely 7 a.m. the next day, Arturo's van reappeared, and he began unloading the tools of his trade. There was scaffolding, which he erected with surprising speed. There were ladders of varying heights. And his tools, they weren't your standard hardware store fare. He had delicate, bonsai-like shears for detail work, a series of custom-made, long-handled trimmers that hummed with a menacing electric buzz, and thick leather gloves that went all the way up to his elbows. "Protection," he declared, holding them up. "The Rose, she is a beautiful lady, but she is fierce. One must respect her boundaries before one can shape her destiny." He worked with a ferocious, focused energy. I'd offered to help, and he'd put me on thorn removal duty, which meant my job was to drag the massive piles of pruned branches to a growing mound at the curb. For the first day, it just looked like I was finally giving my bushes a massive, long-overdue haircut. But by the afternoon of day 2, a shape began to emerge. A distinct, unmistakable curve of a tail. The neighborhood, which usually hummed with the quiet rhythm of retired life and work-from-home schedules, began to take notice. Mrs. Gable from 3 doors down, who walked her tiny, trembling chihuahua at the same time every day, stopped dead in her tracks, her mouth slightly agape. I gave her a friendly wave. She just blinked and scurried away. My next-door neighbor, Stan, a retired history teacher with a great sense of humor and a shared disdain for Brenda's reign, came over, leaning on our shared fence. "All right, Mark, I gotta ask," he said, a grin playing on his lips. "What in the Sam Hill is going on over here?" "Just a little landscaping, Stan," I said, trying to play it cool. "Landscaping," he chuckled. "Looks to me like you're excavating a stegosaurus. Is this your response to Brenda's letter?" I confessed the whole plan. Stan listened, his grin widening with every detail. When I finished, he let out a hearty laugh that echoed down the street. "Oh, that's beautiful, kid. Just beautiful," he wheezed, wiping a tear from his eye. "Brenda is going to have a full-blown grade A aneurysm. Her head might actually spin around. I'll bring the popcorn." From that moment on, Stan was my lookout and my #1 fan, offering cold beers over the fence at the end of the day. The work was a montage of beautiful suburban chaos. Arturo, perched atop his scaffolding like a maestro conducting an orchestra, would shout commands. "More arch in the back. The beast must have posture. And no, the clavicle of the Triceratops must have more angst." Cars began to slow down as they drove past my house. I'd see phones raised to snap pictures. Kids on bikes would stop and stare in wide-eyed wonder. A FedEx driver, dropping off a package, just looked at the emerging T-Rex, looked at me, and said, "Dude, respect." Of course, we had one very dedicated, very unhappy spectator. Brenda's curtains were in a constant state of twitch. Every time I looked over, I could see her silhouette, a motionless figure of pure rage. She came out several times a day to ostentatiously water her pathetic little petunias, all the while glaring daggers at our operation. She was taking pictures. Lots of pictures. I could see the flash of her phone. She was documenting every branch, every cut, building her case. On the third day, Arturo was adding the finishing touches to the T-Rex's fearsome open maw. "It needs something," he mused, tapping his chin. "Ah, I have it." He disappeared into his van and came back with a handful of small, white-painted rocks. With delicate precision, he wedged them into the thorny mouth of the beast. Teeth. He had given the rosebush T-Rex a set of pearly white rock teeth. It was the most ridiculous, most brilliant thing I had ever seen in my life. "Now," Arturo said, stepping back to admire his work, his chest puffed out with pride. "Now he is ready to roar." The project was nearly complete. The Stegosaurus grazed peacefully by the driveway, its thorny plates immaculate. The Brachiosaurus elegantly stretched its neck towards the oak tree. And the T-Rex, my glorious crimson T-Rex, stood poised, ready to menace the beige heart of Pleasant Meadows. The stage was set. All we needed was our audience. And I had a feeling she was about to make her entrance. The fourth morning dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for a prehistoric debut. Arturo applied the final meticulous snips, trimming a stray leaf here, adjusting a thorny horn there. He wiped his brow, descended his ladder for the last time, and turned to me with the exhausted, triumphant air of a surgeon who has just completed a 24-hour operation. "Finito," he declared, his arms spread wide. "Behold, Operation Jurassic Thorns is complete." They were magnificent. They were utterly, undeniably, pants-wettingly absurd. The T-Rex, composed of deep red Mr. Lincoln roses, looked positively ferocious, its rock teeth glinting in the sun. It was aimed directly at Brenda's front window like a thorny cannon. The Stegosaurus, made from a hardy pink variety, was actually quite charming, its back adorned with plates of dense leaves and budding flowers. And the Brachiosaurus, a pale yellow climber, was a thing of improbable grace. Most importantly, as Arturo had gleefully pointed out with his tape measure, not a single part of any dinosaur exceeded the newly discovered bylaw for sculptural installations, a loophole he'd found buried in the HOA addendums that was clearly meant for garden gnomes and flamingos. We were, by the most ridiculous technicality, in compliance. The quiet of the morning was shattered by a shriek. It was a sound somewhere between a boiling kettle and a distressed pterodactyl. It came from across the street. Brenda Barlow had thrown open her front door and was standing on her porch, her hand clasped to her chest, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked at the dinosaurs, then at me, then back at the dinosaurs. For a moment, I thought Stan's prediction of an aneurysm was about to come true. She didn't yell at me. She didn't march across the street. She just pointed a trembling finger in my direction, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, before she spun around, retreated into her house, and slammed the door. "I believe," Arturo said with a satisfied smile, "that we have made an impression." Less than 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled slowly down our street and pulled up to the curb, right between the T-Rex's head and the Stegosaurus's tail. Brenda was right behind it, marching across my lawn with a look of grim vindication on her face. This was it. She'd gone nuclear. 2 officers got out of the car. They were young, looked like they'd rather be anywhere else, and had the weary expressions of people who deal with suburban nonsense for a living. One officer's name tag read Miller, the other Davis. "Good morning, ma'am," Miller said to Brenda, his eyes already drifting towards the T-Rex, and a flicker of disbelief crossing his face. "You called about a disturbance?" "Yes, officer. Thank you for coming so promptly," Brenda said, her voice dripping with venomous sweetness. "It's this monstrosity." She gestured wildly at my entire front yard. "Vandalism, public menace. He's created a hostile environment." Officer Davis, the taller of the two, was now staring openly at the Stegosaurus, a slow smile creeping onto his face. He was trying to fight it, but he was losing, badly. Miller turned to me. "Morning, sir. This your property?" "Yes, officer," I said politely, leaning against my porch railing. "Mark Jensen. Just doing a little pruning per the HOA's request." "Right," Miller said, struggling to keep his tone professional. He cleared his throat. "So, ma'am," he said, turning back to Brenda, "you're saying your neighbor turned his bushes into dinosaurs?" "They are a blight," Brenda insisted, her voice rising. "They're terrifying the children." As if on cue, a 10-year-old kid on a bright green bicycle rode by on the sidewalk. He skidded to a stop, his eyes wide. "Whoa, awesome T-Rex, mister," he yelled before pedaling off. Officer Davis coughed, a sound that was suspiciously close to a laugh. Miller shot him a look. "Sir," Miller said to me, his face a perfect mask of neutrality, "did the HOA specify what shape your bushes needed to be?" "Nope," I said, popping the P. "Just that they needed to be pruned uniformly." Miller nodded slowly, looking back at Brenda. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not seeing a crime here. It's his private property. The bushes aren't obstructing the sidewalk or creating a traffic hazard." But it's an eyesore," she sputtered. "That may be," Davis chimed in, having finally composed himself. "But there's no law against bad taste. This is a civil matter. You'll have to take it up with your homeowners association." The irony of this statement was so thick you could cut it with a hedge trimmer. Brenda's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. She was being told to tattle, to herself. "This is unacceptable," she hissed. "It is what it is, ma'am," Miller said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Have a good day, sir," he added, tipping his hat to me. The two officers got back in their cruiser. As they pulled away, I saw both of them finally give in, their shoulders shaking with silent laughter. Brenda stood frozen on my lawn, utterly defeated. She shot me a look of pure, concentrated hatred that could have curdled milk from 50 paces. Then, without another word, she turned and stalked back to her house. Arturo, who had been watching the entire exchange from the side of my house, strode over and clapped me on the back. "Victory," he said, his voice full of emotion. "My friend, this is the sweetest victory." I watched Brenda's door slam shut. It was a victory, all right, but I knew this war was far from over. I had just won a major battle, but Brenda Barlow was not the type to accept unconditional surrender. She was retreating to her beige fortress to plan her next attack. Brenda's counterattack came 2 days later, not with a police car, but with another creamy envelope. This one was hand-delivered to my mailbox, a clear power move. It was a notice for an emergency HOA meeting to be held at the community clubhouse. The font was larger this time, more aggressive. Agenda Item 1, and only. Addressing the unsanctioned zoological topiary at 124 Blossom Lane, and a vote on its immediate and forced removal at the homeowner's expense. She wasn't just trying to get rid of them anymore. She was trying to make me pay for their destruction. The audacity was breathtaking. "You have to go," Sarah said over the phone. She had seen pictures of the dinosaurs and had cycled through mortification, disbelief, and finally, a grudging sense of amusement. "You can't let her railroad this through without a fight." "Oh, I'm going," I said. "And I'm bringing the original letter with me." The community clubhouse was a bland, beige room that smelled faintly of stale coffee and regret. About 30 of my neighbors were packed into uncomfortable folding chairs. The air was thick with tension. I saw Stan give me a discreet thumbs up from the back row. I took a seat near him, feeling like a defendant walking into his own trial. Brenda stood at a podium at the front of the room, looking severe and powerful in another one of her pantsuits. Gerald, her silent VP, sat beside her, looking grim. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Brenda began, her voice ringing with false sincerity. "We are here tonight to discuss a serious threat to our community's aesthetic and financial well-being." She clicked a button, and a projector screen behind her flickered to life. The first image was a beautiful, professionally taken photograph of a generic, boring suburban house with perfect landscaping. "This," Brenda said, her voice filled with reverence, "is the Pleasant Meadows ideal. Order, conformity, value." She clicked again. The image changed to a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my T-Rex taken from her window. It was a terrible picture, making it look like a monstrous, thorny demon looming in the shadows. There were audible gasps from some of the residents. "And this," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "is the blight that now infects Blossom Lane." She proceeded to deliver a 10-minute presentation, complete with a slideshow of her terrible photos, highlighting the threatening postures of the dinosaurs, the inappropriate use of rocks as teeth, and the potential danger of attracting paleontologists to the neighborhood. It was a masterclass in pearl-clutching and fear-mongering. When she was done, she opened the floor for discussion. A woman in the front row, who I recognized as one of Brenda's close friends, stood up. "I, for one, am appalled," she declared. "My little Timmy is having nightmares about being eaten by a rosebush. What about the children?" Then Stan stood up from the back. "Oh, give me a break, Martha," he boomed, his teacher voice commanding the room. "Your Timmy isn't afraid of those bushes. He was over there yesterday asking Mark if he could name the Stegosaurus a spike." "The kid loves them. I think they're clever. For the first time in 10 years, there's something interesting to look at on this street." The room erupted into murmurs. The community was clearly divided. Brenda's allies talked about property values and the sanctity of the bylaws. Stan's growing faction argued for creativity and telling Brenda to relax for once in her life. One poor guy in the middle just wanted to know if this would affect the annual chili cook-off. Finally, Brenda pointed at me. "Mr. Jensen, do you have anything to say in your defense before we vote?" I walked to the front of the room and stood beside the podium holding up the original letter she had sent me. "Brenda and fellow residents of Pleasant Meadows," I began. "I'm not going to give a big speech. I'm just going to read you the letter that started all of this." I read the letter aloud, my voice calm and clear. When I got to the key line, I paused for effect. "We kindly request that you rectify this issue. It says the bushes must be pruned to a uniform height not to exceed 36 inches. I put the letter down. It does not say they can't be shaped like dinosaurs. It doesn't mention prehistoric reptiles at all. I read the bylaws cover to cover. There's nothing in there about it. I complied with the letter of the law. I pruned them. They are, in fact, incredibly uniform for a T-Rex and a Stegosaurus." A few people chuckled. I could see the logic of my argument dawning on some of the more neutral faces. Brenda's face was turning that familiar shade of blotchy red. "This is semantic nonsense," she snapped. "You know very well what the spirit of the law intended." "Maybe the spirit of the law should learn to be more specific," I countered. The vote was a tense affair. Brenda called for a show of hands. When the dust settled, the count was 14 in favor of removal, 16 against. I had won, by 2 votes. The meeting ended in chaos. Brenda, furious and humiliated, slammed her gavel down and declared the meeting adjourned. I was swarmed by a small group of neighbors, led by Stan, congratulating me on my victory. It felt good, but as I walked home, I saw Brenda watching me from the clubhouse door. The look on her face wasn't one of defeat. It was one of renewed determination. I had won the battle, and I had won the public debate, but I knew, with chilling certainty, that she was already planning her next move. This wasn't over. The tipping point, the event that would escalate my petty suburban squabble into a full-blown international incident, or at least a national one, came from an unexpected source. Stan's grandson, Josh. Josh was a lanky, tech-savvy teenager who thought my dinosaur bushes were the coolest thing he'd ever seen. During a visit to his grandpa, he took a few pictures with his fancy DSLR camera. Not blurry phone pics from a spy window like Brenda's, but glorious high-resolution shots that captured the dinosaurs in the golden light of late afternoon. That evening, he uploaded his favorite shot to Reddit's RR Malicious Compliance subreddit. The picture was perfect. The crimson T-Rex in the foreground, looking both majestic and utterly absurd, with Brenda's sterile, obsessively neat house visible in the background. He titled the post, "HOA demanded my grandpa's neighbor prune his rose bushes." He complied. I went to bed that night thinking I had achieved a minor local victory. I woke up the next morning a folk hero. My phone was the first sign that something was wrong. Or very, very right. It was buzzing incessantly on my nightstand. I had dozens of text messages, mostly from friends sending me links. The Reddit post had blown up. It was on the front page. It had tens of thousands of upvotes and hundreds of awards. The comment section was a glorious sea of support. People were sharing their own HOA horror stories. They were calling me a legend, a hero of the common man. Someone had dubbed the incident the Cretaceous Compliance. By 10 a.m., it had escaped the confines of Reddit. Local news blogs had picked up the story. Then a popular Twitter account with millions of followers shared the picture. By noon, my quiet suburban street was no longer quiet. A steady stream of cars was cruising by, the drivers slowing down to take pictures of my yard. Then the news van showed up. I was in the middle of taking out the recycling, wearing an old t-shirt with a coffee stain on it and a pair of plaid pajama pants, when a white van with a giant Channel 8 logo on the side pulled up. A reporter, a ridiculously handsome man named Dave, and his cameraman hopped out and made a beeline for me. "Mark Jensen?" Dave asked, extending a microphone. "Dave Miles, Channel 8 News. We're doing a story on a local homeowner who's become something of an internet sensation. Would you be willing to say a few words about your unique landscaping?" My brain went into panic mode. Say no. Go inside. Lock the door. But then I looked across the street and saw Brenda standing on her porch, watching the news van with a look of absolute, soul-withering fury. And I knew I had to do it. "Sure, Dave," I said, trying to act like being interviewed in my pajamas was a normal Tuesday. "What would you like to know?" The interview was a blur. I found myself telling the whole story, from Nana Rose planting the bushes to the first letter to Brenda's tape measure ambush. I tried to be charming and witty, framing the whole thing not as a mean-spirited prank, but as a story of creative expression versus bureaucratic overreach. The cameraman got some great B-roll footage, panning lovingly over the dinosaurs. "So, what's your message to the HOA?" Dave asked, wrapping up. I looked straight into the camera, a perfect, beautiful soundbite forming in my head. "My message? Be careful what you ask for. You wanted pruned bushes, you got pruned bushes. You just didn't specify Cretaceously pruned." Dave loved it. He thanked me, they packed up, and drove off. I went inside, my heart racing, feeling a cocktail of adrenaline and terror. What had I just done? I found out 2 hours later. The segment had already been posted on the news station's website, and was being shared everywhere. My little joke was the headline. I was the quirky, lovable hero. The HOA was the villain. And that, apparently, was the last straw for Brenda Barlow. Around 4 p.m., there was a sharp, aggressive knock at my door. It was a process server. He handed me a thick envelope and left without a word. My hands trembled as I opened it. It was from the HOA's legal counsel. Brenda had bypassed all normal channels. She had convened a sanctions committee, consisting of herself and Gerald, and issued the nuclear option. Inside was a fine. Not for $100, for $5,000. The violation was a laundry list of new, completely fabricated infractions. Unapproved major landscaping modification, creating a public nuisance attracting unwanted media attention, and my personal favorite, failure to adhere to the community's intended aesthetic. The letter concluded by stating that if the fine was not paid and the bushes were not returned to a compliant, non-zoological state within 48 hours, the HOA would place a lien on my house. This was it, the climax. She was trying to ruin me, to take my home. The absurdity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. Brenda Barlow was no longer a joke. She was a real threat. The final battle was here, and I wasn't sure if I was going to win. The fear lasted for about an hour. It was a cold, clenching panic that made my hands sweat and my stomach churn. $5,000. A lien on my house. This had escalated far beyond a simple dispute over gardening. This was war, and she had just launched an intercontinental ballistic missile. I paced my living room, the legal papers crinkling in my fist, 100 worst-case scenarios playing out in my head. Then my phone rang. It was Stan. "Did you get it?" he asked, his voice grim. "The $5,000 love letter?" "Yeah, I got it," I said, my voice hollow. "I think she's finally got me, Stan." "Don't you dare think that, kid," he said, a surprising amount of steel in his voice. "She's overplayed her hand. She's desperate. Now just sit tight, the board is meeting." "What board?" I asked, confused. "I thought she was the board." "She's the president," Stan corrected. "But there are 4 other members, and right now their phones are ringing off the hook, mine included." It turned out Stan was the HOA treasurer, a fact he'd conveniently neglected to mention. "She called this a sanctions committee meeting without notifying any of us. That's a massive violation of our own bylaws. She's gone rogue." What happened next? I pieced together later from Stan's gleeful recounting. The Channel 8 news segment had aired on the 6 o'clock news. My story, the quirky human interest piece, was followed immediately by a segment on the local housing market, which featured a real estate expert talking about the importance of community appeal. The juxtaposition was not flattering for Pleasant Meadows. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The HOA's public-facing Facebook page, which was normally a sleepy feed of reminders about garbage day, was flooded. Hundreds of comments poured in, most of them featuring dinosaur emojis and the hashtag #CretaceousCompliance. People were calling them a laughingstock. Worse, a local, slightly sharky law firm posted on Twitter, "If the Pleasant Meadows HOA is threatening you with illegal fines, give us a call. We love cases like this." The other board members panicked. They weren't power-mad tyrants like Brenda. They were just retirees who had wanted to have some say over the color of the community center's new curtains. They hated bad press. They hated the threat of lawsuits even more. Stan told me they convened an emergency board meeting via Zoom at 7 p.m. Brenda, furious that they would dare meet without her, joined the call and immediately went on the offensive. But the tide had turned. They pointed out her bylaw violations. They pointed out the legal exposure. They pointed out that Good Morning America had left a voicemail at the clubhouse. They put it to a vote. The motion was simple: rescind any and all fines and sanctions against property 124 Blossom Lane, and issue a formal public apology to the homeowner, Mr. Mark Jensen, for the misunderstanding. The vote was 4-1. The final, glorious moment came around 8 p.m. I was staring out my window when I saw Gerald, the silent VP, walk across the street and knock on Brenda's door. He was holding a single piece of paper. He was inside for less than a minute. When he came out, he looked relieved. A few moments later, Brenda Barlow's front door flew open. She stormed out, not even bothering to close the door behind her, got in her beige sedan, and peeled out of her driveway with a squeal of tires that was, in itself, a major violation of the community's noise ordinance. Stan called me a minute later. "It's done," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Fines are gone. They're drafting the apology now. Oh, and one more thing." "What's that?" "She resigned, effective immediately." I hung up the phone and walked out onto my porch. The air was cool and quiet. Across the street, Brenda's front door was still hanging open. The war was over. I had won. Life in Pleasant Meadows settled into a new, stranger normal over the next few months. The apology letter from the HOA was posted publicly on their Facebook page. A beautiful document of corporate backpedaling and veiled groveling. Brenda Barlow sold her house in less than a week, disappearing from the neighborhood as quickly and dramatically as she had reigned over it. I never saw her again. My dinosaur bushes became a local landmark. For a while, there was a steady stream of weekend traffic, people driving by to take pictures. The house even became a designated stop on a local Pokemon Go route. The kids loved them. The adults, free from Brenda's tyrannical gaze, seemed to loosen up. Brightly colored garden gnomes began appearing on lawns. Someone down the street installed a bright pink flamingo. It was a small, quiet revolution of lawn decor. At the next HOA election, Stan was voted in as the new president, winning by a landslide on a simple 3-word platform: lighten up, people. His first act was to formally strike Bylaw 7, Section 4C, from the books. This morning, I found myself in the same spot where it all began. On my front porch, cradling a coffee mug. Sarah was beside me, having moved in a month ago, admitting that she couldn't resist the allure of dating a local celebrity. She looked at the T-Rex, whose red roses were in full, glorious bloom. "I have to admit," she said, shaking her head with a smile, "the Stegosaurus is kind of cute. He's grown on me." I looked out at my thorny, ridiculous, triumphant sculptures. They were a bit shaggier now, in need of a trim from their creator Arturo, who had offered me lifetime artistic maintenance as a professional courtesy. They were a constant, beautiful reminder of the strangest few weeks of my life. I took a sip of my coffee, the morning air filled with the scent of roses and victory. "They're not just bushes, hun," I said, a grin spreading across my face. "They're a monument. A beautiful, thorny monument to the fact that if you push a reasonable man too far, he just might get unreasonable and prehistoric